While fighters ruled the skies and bombers erased cities, other aircraft flew without guns, without armor, and with almost no guarantee of coming back. They landed on open seas, in jungles, and in hell itself to recover those the war had already abandoned. This is the complete catalog of all emergency aircraft used in World War II. Let's begin with maritime search and rescue. Consolidated Catalina, the Angel of the Pacific. A long-range flying boat famous for the Dumbo rescue missions, capable of landing in open seas to recover castaways in areas where ships would take days to reach. It played a decisive role in rescuing the crew of the USS Indianapolis, keeping dozens of survivors on its wings and fuselage until escorts arrived, reducing the risk of shark attacks. Vickers Warwick, the redeemed bomber. A failure as a heavy bomber, it found its true purpose as a search and rescue aircraft by carrying a large motorized lifeboat beneath the fuselage. Over the English Channel, it parachuted these boats to downed pilots, dramatically increasing their chances of survival until rescue forces arrived. Supermarine Walrus, the indestructible ugly duckling. A slow amphibious biplane, but exceptionally tough, with a hull capable of operating in rough seas where few aircraft dared to land. It was widely used to recover downed pilots in hazardous areas, including mined waters, inaccessible to conventional rescue ships. Heinkel 59, the Red Cross controversy. A rescue biplane painted white with red crosses, initially employed in unarmed search and rescue missions. In 1940, it became the center of controversy when the RAF began shooting it down, accusing the Luftwaffe of using medical markings for naval reconnaissance and espionage, marking the end of neutral aerial rescue operations early in the war. Medical evacuation and extraction. Fieseler-Storch, the king of short landings. A masterpiece of stall engineering, with high-lift wings, automatic slats, and long-travel landing gear capable of taking off and landing in extremely short distances, including rough ground and improvised roads. It became indispensable for evacuating wounded officers, carrying dispatches, and extracting key personnel from encircled areas. Its place in history was sealed during the daring 1943 rescue of Benito Mussolini at Gran Sasso, when it lifted off from a tiny mountain plateau, something virtually impossible for any other conventional aircraft of the era. Stinson L-5 Sentinel, the jungle-flying jeep. More rugged and powerful than the light Piper Cubs, the L-5 was designed from the outset for liaison, observation, and medical evacuation. Its redesigned rear fuselage featured wide side access, allowing a standard stretcher to be loaded inside the cabin, shielding the wounded from weather and airflow. It proved vital in the China-Burma-India theater, serving as the primary aeromedical evacuation aircraft for Allied forces, including the Chindits, landing in fragile clearings, improvised trails, and muddy ground under constant enemy threat. Sikorsky R-4 Hoverfly, the vertical pioneer, the first mass-produced military helicopter to see operational use. A simple and limited machine built from metal tubing and lightweight skin. Even so, in 1944, it carried out the first helicopter medical evacuations in combat zones, extracting wounded personnel from mountainous terrain and dense jungle in the Southeast Asian theater, areas completely inaccessible to fixed-wing aircraft. Breakers of the siege, survival logistics. Junkers 52. A corrugated skin tri-motor, slow and already obsolete at the start of the war, yet remarkably tolerant of improvised runways made of mud, snow, and ice. It became the ultimate symbol of German logistical collapse during the siege of Stalingrad, when it was used in an impossible attempt to supply the encircled 6th Army inside the pocket known as the Cauldron. The Luftwaffe promised to deliver around 500 tons of supplies per day, but rarely achieved even a fraction of that. Hundreds of Ju-52s were shot down by fighters, anti-aircraft fire, or lost in accidents, sealing not only the fate of the trapped army, but also the irreversible destruction of Germany's air transport force. Douglas C-47, the Artery of Victory. The military version of the legendary DC-3, renowned for exceptional mechanical reliability in almost any climate or theater of war. During the Battle of the Bulge, it became vital to keeping American forces alive at Bastogne, especially the 101st Airborne Division. When the weather finally broke, squadrons of C-47s pushed through low clouds, thick fog, and anti-aircraft fire to drop ammunition, food, medical supplies, and blood plasma. This airlift sustained the American defense until Patton's armored forces broke the encirclement. Messerschmitt Gigant, the six-engine monster. Derived from a giant glider, the Me-323 was the largest land-based transport aircraft to see operational service in the war. With 6 engines and front-hinged shark mouth loading doors, it could carry trucks, heavy artillery components, and loads no other German aircraft could move. Used as a last resort lifeline to supply Axis forces in North Africa and later Tunisia, it proved tragically vulnerable, huge, slow, and lightly defended. In April 1943, entire formations were annihilated by Allied fighters over the Mediterranean in what became known as the Palm Sunday Massacre, marking the final collapse of Germany's ability to sustain large forces by air. Weapons of desperation and last resort, the suicide attack. Yokosuka MXY-7, Oka, the flower of death. Essentially a piloted rocket-powered glide bomb carrying a warhead of roughly 2,600 pounds. It was carried beneath Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers and released at a distance from the enemy fleet. Once its rockets ignited, it dived at extreme speeds, often exceeding 560 mph in the terminal dive, making interception in the final seconds nearly impossible. Used during the desperate defense of Okinawa, it became known to Americans as the Baka bomb, a pejorative nickname that reflected not its ineffectiveness, but the brutal logic of its suicidal design. Nakajima Ki-115, the bamboo spear. A kamikaze aircraft deliberately designed to be cheap, simple, and disposable, built from non-strategic materials and reused components. It was never intended for extended training or reuse. Its landing gear was detachable and usually jettisoned shortly after takeoff to save weight and allow reuse on another airframe, a choice that made landing physically impossible. Bakamnatter, the piloted rocket. An emergency interceptor conceived when conventional airfields were already vulnerable or destroyed by Allied bombing. The Natter launched vertically from a simple tower, rocket boosted straight into the bomber stream, then fired a salvo of unguided rockets housed in its nose. After the attack, the forward section separated while the pilot and engine were meant to descend by parachute for possible recovery. Although test flights were conducted, including one fatal manned flight, the BA-349 never reached operational combat, remaining an extreme symbol of German technological desperation in the final months of the war. Red Alert, emergency air defense. Messerschmitt Komet, the suicidal interceptor. The only operational rocket fighter in history, built solely for moments of absolute emergency, when Allied bomber formations were already over German cities. It took off under the thrust of an extremely volatile rocket engine, climbed at absurd rates, and made just a single attack pass before running out of fuel within minutes. Landing was done on a skid, powerless and unpowered, making the return more dangerous than combat itself. Too fast to intercept, it killed more of its own pilots in accidents than it destroyed enemy bombers, becoming the perfect symbol of air defense driven by desperation. Heinkel Volksjäger, the collapse fighter. Designed in a matter of weeks as Germany's industry was already in ruins, the He-162 was a last-ditch attempt to field a cheap, fast interceptor to defend the Reich. Built largely of wood and powered by a jet engine mounted above the fuselage, it was intended to be flown by minimally trained pilots. Entering service in the final months of the war, it achieved almost no real impact, reflecting a brutal truth. There was no longer enough time, fuel, or experienced pilots left to save what remained of the Luftwaffe. Mitsubishi Shusui, the final wall. The Japanese counterpart to that Me-163 rushed into development to intercept B-29 Super Fortress bombers, devastating the Japanese home islands. Like its German equivalent, the Shusui was a rocket fighter with extremely limited endurance, designed purely for point defense emergencies. Technical failures, fuel shortages, and the rapid advance of the war prevented it from ever entering effective combat. Its mere existence, however, reveals the final stage of the Pacific conflict, defending the sky with experimental machines before the cities themselves ceased to exist. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and leave a like. Let us know in the comments which catalog you want to see next. See you in the next one.